The emergency room fell silent as Sarah Martinez wiped the blood from her hands. Her scrubs still stained from the motorcycle accident victim she'd just helped stabilize. At 5 feet 2 inches and 125 pounds, she looked like any other night shift nurse finishing another grueling 12-hour shift. Her colleagues barely glanced up as she gathered her things, their minds already focused on their own exhaustion and the drive home. None of them could have imagined that in just 3 hours, this quiet, soft-spoken woman would be standing over a former Marine Corps drill instructor, her boot pressed firmly against his chest while he gasped for air on a training mat. Just a nurse, Detective Mike Rodriguez had muttered under his breath when Captain Williams announced the new civilian consultant for their tactical response team. Rodriguez, a towering 6 feet 4 inches ex-Marine with forearms like tree trunks and a chest that strained against his Kevlar vest, had spent 8 years in combat zones before joining the police force. He'd trained with Navy SEALs, sparred with MMA fighters, and survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. The idea that some hospital worker was going to teach him about combat situations was, in his mind, laughable. He'd seen nurses before, sweet, caring people who brought you juice and asked about your pain level. What could someone like that possibly know about real violence? Sarah had heard the whispers as she entered the police training facility that morning. The skeptical glances, the barely concealed eye rolls, the way conversations stopped when she walked by. She'd faced this reaction before in the Army, in medical school, and even in the ER when she'd first started. People saw her size, her profession, her gentle demeanor with patients, and they made assumptions. They saw someone who cleaned wounds and dispensed medication, not someone who had spent 4 years as a combat medic in some of the most dangerous territories on Earth. They didn't know about the nights she'd crawled through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers, or the times she'd had to fight her way out of situations with nothing but her medical bag and her training. The morning briefing had been routine enough. Captain Williams explained the new cross-training initiative, designed to give officers better medical response skills while giving medical professionals insight into tactical situations. Sarah stood quietly in the corner, taking notes, observing the team dynamics. She watched Rodriguez crack his knuckles and flex his shoulders, noticed how the other officers deferred to his experience, saw the way he commanded respect simply by existing in the space. She'd served with men like him before, good soldiers, brave and skilled, but sometimes so confident in their own abilities that they forgot to respect the capabilities of others. It was a lesson she'd learned to teach carefully, but effectively. The Riverside Police Department's tactical training facility buzzed with the usual pre-drill energy. Officers checked their gear, stretched their muscles, and engaged in the ritualistic trash talk that preceded any physical training session. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the converted warehouse, casting long shadows across the blue training mats that covered most of the floor space. Sarah Martinez stood near the equipment rack, quietly observing the controlled chaos around her. She'd arrived 30 minutes early, as was her habit, and had already changed into the standard training uniform provided by the department. The black tactical pants and gray shirt hung loose on her small frame, making her appear even more diminutive among the sea of broad shoulders and muscled physiques surrounding her. "Gentlemen," Captain Williams called out, his voice cutting through the chatter, "I want you to meet Sarah Martinez. She's going to be working with us on the new Medical Tactical Integration Program. Sarah brings a unique perspective to our team." The room fell quiet as all eyes turned to Sarah. She stepped forward slightly, her posture straight and confident despite the obvious skepticism radiating from several officers. "Thank you, Captain," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. "I look forward to working with all of you. My goal is to help bridge the gap between medical response and tactical operations, sharing insights that might save lives in the field." Detective Rodriguez leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying the small woman before him. He'd been in enough briefings to recognize the type, civilian experts who came in with theories and textbook knowledge but had never felt the weight of a real threat. His experience in Fallujah and Helmand province had taught him that survival came down to strength, speed, and the ability to inflict damage when necessary. What could someone who spent their days taking blood pressure readings possibly teach him about combat? "So, Martinez," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying just enough challenge to make the other officers pay attention. What exactly is your background? Besides the medical stuff, Sarah met his gaze steadily. 4 years as a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division. 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. I've been an emergency room nurse for the past 6 years, specializing in trauma care. A few officers nodded with grudging respect at the mention of the 82nd Airborne, but Rodriguez remained unimpressed. Medics were support personnel, he reasoned. They stayed behind the lines, patched up wounds, and evacuated casualties. Important work, sure, but not combat. Combat medic, he repeated, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. That's basically a first aid course with a fancy name, right? Your job was to hide behind cover and patch people up, not actually fight. The room tensed. Several officers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the challenge in Rodriguez's tone. Captain Williams stepped forward, but Sarah raised a hand slightly, signaling that she could handle the situation. I understand your skepticism, Detective Rodriguez, Sarah said calmly. I've encountered it before. Would you like to share your background with me? Rodriguez straightened up, his chest puffing out slightly. 8 years Marine Corps Infantry. 3 combat deployments. Close quarters combat instructor. Currently our department's defensive tactics specialist. He gestured to his impressive physique. I've been doing this since before you probably even thought about joining the military. Impressive credentials, Sarah acknowledged. And I'm sure your experience has been valuable to this department. Damn right it has, Rodriguez replied, warming to the praise. I've trained most of the officers in this room. Hand-to-hand combat, weapon retention, tactical movement. Real skills that keep people alive when things go sideways. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I'm curious about your hand-to-hand combat training. What systems do you focus on? Marine Corps martial arts program, primarily. Some boxing, some wrestling. Practical stuff that works in the real world. Not like those fancy martial arts movies. Excellent. Would you be willing to demonstrate some techniques? I'd like to understand your training methods better. Rodriguez grinned, sensing an opportunity to showcase his skills in front of his colleagues. Sure thing. Who do you want me to work with? Sarah stepped onto the nearest training mat. How about with me? I'd like to experience your technique firsthand. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Several officers exchanged glances, unsure whether Sarah was serious or making some kind of joke. Rodriguez looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. Look, Martinez, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I outweigh you by about 100 pounds. I don't want to hurt you on your first day. I understand your concern, Sarah replied, already moving to the center of the mat. But I think it would be valuable for everyone to see how different body types and skill sets interact. Captain Williams, would this be acceptable for training purposes? Captain Williams, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, nodded slowly. If you're both willing, I think it could be educational. Rodriguez, take it easy. This is about demonstration, not domination. Rodriguez stepped onto the mat, still looking skeptical. All right, but we're going light contact only. I'll show you a basic takedown, something we might use to subdue a suspect. The other officers formed a circle around the mat, some pulling out their phones to record what they expected to be a brief and predictable demonstration. Sarah stood relaxed in the center, her hands at her sides, watching Rodriguez carefully. Okay, Rodriguez said, settling into a combat stance. I'm going to come at you like a suspect might, aggressive, trying to overpower you. Your job is to try to avoid the takedown. Ready? Sarah nodded, her expression calm and focused. Rodriguez moved forward with surprising speed for his size, reaching for Sarah's shoulders with the intention of using his weight advantage to force her to the ground. It was a move he'd executed successfully hundreds of times in training, a straightforward demonstration of how size and strength could overcome resistance. What happened next occurred so quickly that most observers had to replay their phone videos to understand the sequence of events. As Rodriguez's hands reached for her shoulders, Sarah's body seemed to flow like water. She stepped slightly to her left, her right hand coming up to redirect Rodriguez's forward momentum while her left hand found a pressure point on his extended arm. Rodriguez found himself suddenly off balance, his own force working against him as Sarah guided him into a controlled fall. But she wasn't finished. As Rodriguez hit the mat, Sarah followed him down, her knee finding the perfect spot on his chest to pin him while her hand maintained control of his arm. In less than 3 seconds, the massive ex-Marine was flat on his back, effectively immobilized by someone nearly half his size. The room fell completely silent. Rodriguez stared up at Sarah, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He'd been in thousands of sparring matches, had faced trained fighters and desperate criminals, but he'd never been taken down so smoothly, so efficiently, with what seemed like so little effort. "What the hell just happened?" he gasped, still trying to process the rapid sequence of events. Sarah released her hold and stepped back, offering Rodriguez a hand up. "You demonstrated exactly what I was hoping to show the group. Size and strength are significant advantages, but they're not the only factors that determine the outcome of a physical confrontation." Rodriguez accepted her help getting to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. "How did you? What was that?" "A combination of leverage, timing, and redirected energy," Sarah explained, her tone remaining professional and educational. "Your approach was textbook, aggressive, forward momentum, using your size advantage. But it also created predictable patterns that could be exploited." The circle of officers began to murmur among themselves, some rewinding their videos to analyze what they'd witnessed. Captain Williams stepped forward, his expression a mixture of surprise and approval. "Martinez, that was impressive. Where did you learn that technique?" "It's adapted from several systems," Sarah replied. "Aikido for the redirection principles, Krav Maga for the efficiency, and some techniques I learned from a Filipino martial artist during my deployment." When you're a combat medic, you learn quickly that sometimes the best way to help your patients is to neutralize the threat that's trying to harm them. Rodriguez was still processing what had happened. His ego bruised, but his professional curiosity piqued. "You said I was predictable. What did you mean by that?" Sarah gestured for him to step back onto the mat. "Would you like me to show you?" "I promised to explain each step this time." Rodriguez nodded, his earlier cockiness replaced by genuine interest in learning. "Watch my position as you approach," Sarah instructed. "Notice how I'm not trying to meet your force with force. Instead, I'm looking for the moment when your momentum commits you to a specific direction." She demonstrated in slow motion, showing how Rodriguez's aggressive approach created a brief window where his balance was compromised. "Your strength is actually working against you here. The harder you push forward, the easier it becomes to redirect that energy." As she walked through the technique step by step, Rodriguez began to understand the principles involved. It wasn't about overpowering an opponent. It was about understanding physics, leverage, and human anatomy. "This is insane," Officer Thompson said from the circle. "I've seen Rodriguez take down guys twice his size. And he still can," Sarah assured him. "These techniques aren't about replacing strength and size. They're about adding tools to your toolkit. Detective Rodriguez has excellent fundamentals. With some adjustments, he could be even more effective." Rodriguez looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "You said you learned this during deployment. What kind of situations were you dealing with?" Sarah's expression grew more serious. "Combat medics don't always have the luxury of staying behind the lines. Sometimes the wounded are in contested areas. Sometimes you have to fight your way to them or fight your way out with them. I learned quickly that traditional size and strength advantages don't always apply in those situations." She paused, her mind clearly revisiting memories from her deployment. "There was a night in Kandahar when our convoy was ambushed. I was treating a wounded soldier when insurgents broke through our perimeter. My rifle was 15 feet away, and I had a 220-pound Taliban fighter coming at me with a knife. Everything I knew about traditional combat said I was dead." The room had gone completely quiet, everyone hanging on her words. "But I wasn't dead," Sarah continued, "because I'd learned that in life-or-death situations, technique beats strength every time. I used his momentum against him just like I did with Detective Rodriguez. The difference was, in Afghanistan, I couldn't afford to be gentle about it. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand the depth of experience behind Sarah's quiet demeanor. This wasn't some civilian consultant playing with martial arts moves. This was someone who had used these skills to survive actual combat. "How many times did you have to fight like that?" he asked quietly. "More than I care to remember," Sarah replied. "But each time taught me something new about the difference between fighting in a gym and fighting for your life. That's what I hope to share with your team, not just techniques, but the mindset that goes with them." Captain Williams looked around the room at his officers, noting the mixture of shock, curiosity, and respect on their faces. "Well, I think we've all learned something valuable already. Martinez, would you be willing to continue the demonstration?" Sarah nodded. "I think it would be helpful to show how these principles apply to different scenarios you might face on the job. Detective Rodriguez, would you be willing to help me demonstrate a few more situations?" Rodriguez, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated, eagerly agreed. "Absolutely. I want to understand how this works." "Good. Let's start with a common scenario. A suspect who's trying to grab your weapon. Officer Thompson, could you play the suspect?" Thompson, a younger officer with about 3 years on the force, stepped forward. "Sure thing. How do you want me to approach this?" "Just like you would if you were actually trying to disarm Detective Rodriguez. Don't hold back. We need to make this realistic." Sarah positioned Rodriguez with his hand on his training weapon, then had Thompson approach from the front. This is a situation where size and strength seem like they should be the determining factors. "Thompson, you're about 190 pounds, so you have a significant advantage over me. Rodriguez, you're trained in weapon retention. Let's see how this plays out." Thompson moved forward, grabbing for Rodriguez's weapon with both hands. Rodriguez, following his training, brought his non-weapon hand up to defend while stepping back to create distance. It was a textbook defensive response, and it worked, or Thompson was unable to gain control of the weapon. "Excellent technique," Sarah observed. "Now, let's see what happens when I try the same approach." She took Thompson's position, facing Rodriguez. "Same scenario. I'm trying to disarm you. Use the same defensive techniques." Rodriguez settled into his stance, confident in his training. Sarah was smaller than Thompson, which should make the defense even easier. Sarah stepped forward, and Rodriguez prepared to execute the same defensive sequence. But instead of grabbing for the weapon directly, Sarah's approach was different. She moved at an angle, her hands targeting specific pressure points on Rodriguez's wrist and forearm. Before he could react, she had disrupted his grip and redirected his defensive movement, leaving him momentarily off balance. In that instant of imbalance, Sarah smoothly disarmed him and stepped back, holding his training weapon. "What the hell?" Rodriguez stared at his empty holster, then at Sarah, who was calmly checking the weapon's safety before handing it back to him. "The same principles apply," Sarah explained. "Your defensive technique was perfect against a traditional attack. But when someone understands pressure points and leverage, they can neutralize your strength advantage." She demonstrated again, this time in slow motion. "Watch where I place my hands. I'm not trying to overpower your grip. I'm attacking the weak points in your hold. No matter how strong you are, there are specific points on the human body where pressure will cause involuntary muscle relaxation." Rodriguez examined his wrist where Sarah had applied pressure. "I couldn't even feel what you were doing until my hand just let go." "Exactly. Your brain received a signal that said, 'Release immediately,' before your conscious mind could process what was happening. It's a neurological response that doesn't care how strong you are." Officer Martinez, a veteran with 12 years on the force, raised his hand. "This is great for disarming, but what about when a suspect is actively fighting? Like, throwing punches, trying to hurt you?" "Excellent question. Detective Rodriguez, would you be willing to demonstrate that scenario?" Rodriguez nodded, settling into a boxing stance. "You want me to actually try to hit you?" "I want you to try to hit me the way you would try to subdue a violent suspect. Obviously, we'll pull our punches for safety, but I need you to commit to the attacks so everyone can see how the techniques work under pressure. Sarah moved to the center of the mat, her stance relaxed and open. Rodriguez began to circle her, looking for an opening. Despite what he'd already seen, his training told him that his reach and power advantages should still matter in a stand-up fight. He threw a straight right hand, fully committed to the punch. Sarah's response was fluid and precise. She redirected his punch while simultaneously moving inside his reach, her elbow finding the nerve cluster in his ribs. Rodriguez's forward momentum carried him past her, and he found himself stumbling forward, his balance compromised. Before he could recover, Sarah had moved behind him, her arm controlling his neck while her other hand controlled his weapon side. Rodriguez was effectively neutralized, unable to continue his attack or access his equipment. "The key," Sarah said, releasing Rodriguez and stepping back, "is not to meet force with force." Detective Rodriguez threw that punch with probably 200 pounds of force behind it. If I had tried to block it directly, his strength would have overwhelmed me. Instead, I redirected that force and used it to put him in a position where his advantages became disadvantages. She gestured for Rodriguez to try again. "This time, try a different approach. Mix up your attacks." Rodriguez threw a combination: left jab, right cross, left hook. Sarah seemed to dance between the punches, each redirection putting Rodriguez slightly more off balance until she found another opening to neutralize him. "How are you doing that?" Officer Thompson asked, clearly frustrated by what he was seeing. "I mean, Rodriguez is fast. He's really fast. But you're making it look like he's moving in slow motion." Sarah smiled. "He's not moving in slow motion, but I'm not trying to react to his punches. I'm reading his body language and positioning myself for his next move before he makes it." She had Rodriguez throw another punch, this time stopping the action just before contact. "Watch his shoulders, his hips, his feet. Your body has to prepare for every movement. If you know how to read those preparations, you can anticipate what's coming." Rodriguez examined his own stance, suddenly aware of how much his body was telegraphing his intentions. "It's like you're seeing the future. Not the future, just the present, more clearly." In Afghanistan, this wasn't about winning sparring matches. It was about staying alive long enough to get wounded soldiers to safety. You learn to see everything, to use every advantage, no matter how small. Captain Williams had been taking notes throughout the demonstration. "Martinez, this is incredible. How long would it take to teach these techniques to the team?" "The basic principles? A few weeks of regular training. True proficiency? That depends on the individual and how much they practice. But even understanding the concepts can make a significant difference in officer safety." She turned to address the full group. "The most important thing to understand is that these techniques don't replace your existing training. They supplement it. Detective Rodriguez's fundamentals are excellent. His strength and size are real advantages. But by adding these concepts, he becomes more effective in a wider range of situations." Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "I want to learn everything you can teach me. This is incredible. I'm glad you're interested. But remember, these techniques require practice and discipline. They're not magic. They're applied physics and anatomy, combined with timing and practice." After the formal training session ended, several officers lingered to ask questions and request additional demonstrations. Sarah answered each inquiry patiently, demonstrating techniques and explaining principles until the training facility was nearly empty. Rodriguez remained behind, clearly eager to learn more. "Martinez, I have to ask, what really happened over there? I mean, you mentioned the ambush in Kandahar, but that sounded like there was more to it." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression distant. "There was more to it. A lot more." She sat down on a bench, her hands clasped in front of her. "The thing about being a combat medic is that you see everything. You see the best of humanity, soldiers willing to die for their brothers. And you see the worst, what people are willing to do to each other." Rodriguez sat down beside her, his earlier antagonism completely forgotten. "I've seen some of that. Different theater, but the same basic shit." "Then you understand," Sarah said. After my first deployment, I came back thinking I was done with violence. I'd seen enough blood, enough death. I wanted to help people heal, not fight. She paused, her mind clearly working through difficult memories. But during my second deployment, I realized that sometimes the best way to help someone heal is to stop the person trying to hurt them. That's when I started training seriously in martial arts. What changed? What made you realize that? Sarah's expression grew darker. We had a forward operating base in a contested area. Small unit, maybe 30 soldiers. I was the only medic. One night, insurgents breached our perimeter. They got to the aid station before our security could stop them. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. He'd been in similar situations and could imagine what was coming. There were 3 wounded soldiers in the aid station, unable to move, completely helpless. And these insurgents, they weren't there to take prisoners. They were there to send a message. Sarah's voice became very quiet. I had about 10 seconds to decide who I was going to be. Was I going to hide and watch them execute my patients? Or was I going to do something about it? What did you do? I did what I had to do. 3 insurgents, all armed, all bigger than me. But they weren't expecting resistance from a medic. They thought I'd be easy to handle. She stood up and began walking toward the training equipment. The first one barely saw me coming. The second one got his rifle halfway up before I disarmed him. The third one, he was smart enough to drop his weapon and surrender. Rodriguez followed her, his respect for Sarah growing with each revelation. Jesus, and you did this while wounded soldiers were watching. One of them was conscious, yeah. Sergeant Martinez, no relation, despite the name. He told me later that he'd never seen anything like it. Said it was like watching a ghost fight. Sarah picked up a training knife from the equipment rack, examining it thoughtfully. After that night, word spread. Other units started requesting me specifically, not just for my medical skills, but because they knew I could handle myself if things went sideways. Is that when you started training seriously? That's when I realized that being a healer and being a warrior weren't mutually exclusive. I spent my off-duty time learning from anyone who would teach me. There was a Filipino contractor who taught me Kali, a former Spetsnaz operator who showed me some systema techniques. Even learned some things from local fighters who understood how to fight with limited resources. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the depth of Sarah's experience. So when you came back to the States, I thought I was done with all of it. I just wanted to be a nurse, help people in a nice, safe hospital. But the skills stayed with me. And after a few years, I realized that maybe there was a way to use them to help people without having to hurt anyone. That's why you're here? To teach us how to be more effective without being more violent. Sarah nodded. Violence should always be the last resort. But when it becomes necessary, it should be quick, efficient, and decisive. Too many officers get hurt because they try to use more force than necessary, or because they don't understand how to end a confrontation quickly. She demonstrated a few more techniques, showing Rodriguez how to control a suspect without causing permanent damage. The goal is to preserve life, theirs and yours. These techniques can help you do that. Rodriguez practiced the movements, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. I have to apologize for earlier. I was a complete ass. You were doing what you thought was right, protecting your team from what you saw as a potential liability. I respect that, but I hope you understand now that assumptions can be dangerous. Oh, I understand. I'll never underestimate someone based on their appearance again. Sarah smiled. That's the first lesson in staying alive. Everyone is dangerous until proven otherwise. But everyone also has something to teach you, if you're willing to learn. ####Chapter 4. The Ripple Effect. Word of Sarah's demonstration spread quickly through the police department. Within days, officers from other shifts were asking Captain Williams if they could attend her training sessions. The video of Rodriguez's takedown, initially recorded as a joke, became a teaching tool that was shared throughout the department. But the real impact went beyond just learning new techniques. Sarah's approach to conflict resolution began to influence how officers thought about their jobs. The thing that struck me, Officer Thompson told his partner during their patrol shift, was how calm she was throughout the whole thing. Like, she wasn't trying to prove anything or show off. She was just teaching. Detective Rodriguez had become one of Sarah's most enthusiastic students. He attended every training session, practiced the techniques on his own time, and even began incorporating her principles into his regular defensive tactics instruction. You know what's weird? He told Sarah after a particularly intense training session. I thought learning this stuff would make me feel less confident, like finding out there were all these gaps in my knowledge. But it's actually the opposite. I feel more confident because I understand better how confrontations actually work. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's the difference between arrogance and confidence. Arrogance assumes you know everything. Confidence knows that you know enough to handle whatever comes up. The training sessions had evolved beyond simple technique demonstrations. Sarah began incorporating scenario-based training, teaching officers how to read situations and de-escalate conflicts before they became physical. The best fight, she would tell her students, is the one you never have to have. But if you do have to fight, it should be over quickly and decisively. Captain Williams had been documenting the training program carefully, noting improvements in officer performance and reductions in use-of-force incidents. The data was impressive enough that he'd begun fielding calls from other departments interested in implementing similar programs. Martinez, he said during one of their regular meetings, I've got the State Training Commission asking about your program. They want to know if you'd be willing to present at their annual conference. Sarah considered the request. I'm honored, but I want to make sure we're not moving too fast. This isn't about creating some new fighting system. It's about changing how officers think about conflict resolution. That's exactly why they want to hear from you. You've managed to improve officer effectiveness while actually reducing the amount of force being used. That's something everyone wants to understand. The success of the program had also attracted attention from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's chief of staff, had heard about Sarah's work with the police department and wanted to discuss implementing similar training for hospital security and emergency room staff. We deal with violent patients more often than people realize, Dr. Walsh explained during their meeting. Having staff who can protect themselves and others without escalating situations could be incredibly valuable. Sarah was intrigued by the possibility. It would need to be adapted for a healthcare environment. The principles are the same, but the application would be different. That's what makes your approach so interesting. You're not just teaching techniques, you're teaching philosophy. How to be strong without being aggressive, how to protect without harming. As word of Sarah's abilities spread, she began receiving requests from other organizations. Corporate security firms wanted to hire her as a consultant. Self-defense schools wanted her to teach seminars. Even a few military units had expressed interest in her training methods. But Sarah remained focused on her original mission. I'm not trying to build an empire, she told Rodriguez during one of their training sessions. I'm trying to change how people think about conflict. If I can help a few officers go home safe to their families, or help them resolve situations without anyone getting hurt, then I've done my job. Rodriguez had been thinking about his own career trajectory. I've been a cop for 8 years, and I always thought the measure of a good officer was how tough they were. How many fights they'd won, how many bad guys they'd taken down. But watching you work, I'm starting to think the measure of a good officer is how many fights they've prevented. That's a sign of wisdom, Sarah replied. Violence should always be the last resort. But when it becomes necessary, it should be precise, controlled, and effective. The transformation in Rodriguez had been remarkable. His colleagues noted that he seemed more confident, more patient, and more effective in his interactions with suspects and citizens. His use-of-force reports had dropped significantly, even though he was handling the same types of calls. It's like I have more options now, he explained to Captain Williams during his quarterly review. Before, if someone was aggressive, I pretty much had to match their energy level or back down. Now I can control the situation without escalating it. Captain Williams had been tracking similar improvements across the entire team. Officers who had trained with Sarah were consistently performing better in high-stress situations, making better decisions, and receiving fewer complaints from citizens. The really interesting thing, he told Sarah, is that the officers seem happier, like they're more satisfied with their work. I think it's because they feel more competent and more in control. Sarah understood the psychology behind the improvement. When you're confident in your abilities, you don't feel the need to prove anything. You can focus on doing the job instead of worrying about whether you're tough enough to handle it. 6 months after Sarah's first demonstration, the training program was put to its ultimate test. Officer Thompson and his partner Rodriguez were responding to a domestic violence call in one of the city's more troubled neighborhoods. The call had come in as a welfare check, but dispatch had updated them en route. Neighbors were reporting screaming and sounds of violence from the apartment. As they approached the building, they could hear the commotion from the street. A man's voice, loud and aggressive, punctuated by the sound of breaking glass. A woman's voice, pleading and frightened. Sounds like it's escalating, Thompson observed, checking his equipment as they climbed the stairs. Rodriguez nodded, his mind already running through possible scenarios. Remember what Martinez taught us about reading the situation. We need to understand what's happening before we decide how to respond. They positioned themselves on either side of the apartment door, listening carefully. The man inside was clearly intoxicated. His words slurred, but his aggression unmistakable. The woman was trying to calm him down, but her efforts seemed to be making him angrier. Rodriguez knocked on the door, his voice authoritative but not aggressive. "Police, we're here to check on everyone's welfare." The apartment went silent for a moment, then erupted in movement. Heavy footsteps, the woman's voice raised in alarm, the sound of something heavy being thrown. "He's got a knife!" the woman screamed. "He's got a knife!" Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of situation where their training would be put to the test. "Sir, we need you to open the door," Rodriguez called out, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "We're here to help." The response was immediate and violent. The door flew open, revealing a man in his 30s, clearly intoxicated, holding a large kitchen knife. He was about 6 feet 2 inches and probably weighed 220 pounds, with the kind of build that suggested he was used to using his size to intimidate people. "Get the hell out of here!" he screamed, waving the knife erratically. "This is none of your business." Behind him, Rodriguez could see a woman huddled in the corner, her face bruised and bleeding. She was clearly terrified, her eyes pleading for help. In the old Rodriguez, this situation would have escalated quickly. He would have drawn his weapon, shouted commands, and the situation would have likely ended with someone getting hurt. But Sarah's training had given him different tools. "Sir, I can see you're upset," Rodriguez said, his voice calm and steady. "We're not here to arrest anyone. We just want to make sure everyone's safe." The man's grip on the knife tightened. "I said get out. She's my wife. I can do what I want." Rodriguez studied the man's posture, his grip on the knife, his positioning. Sarah's training had taught him to read body language, to understand the difference between someone who was actually preparing to attack and someone who was just trying to intimidate. "I understand this is your home," Rodriguez continued, slowly moving his hands to a non-threatening position. "But we have a job to do. We need to make sure everyone's okay." The man took a step forward, the knife still raised but not in an attack position. Rodriguez could see that his balance was compromised by the alcohol, his movements uncoordinated. "You want to know if everyone's okay?" the man slurred. "Everyone's fine. Now get out." Rodriguez made a decision. Instead of escalating the situation with commands and threats, he would use Sarah's approach, de-escalation through understanding and controlled response. "I can see you care about your wife," Rodriguez said, taking a small step forward. "That's good. But right now she looks scared.